Okay, so this is kind of a messy area here because it's at the beginning stages, or at least part of it is. But I want to demonstrate how a lot of people ask me how many layers do I use to make the very dark blue that you see there, or sometimes it's other colors, but in this case I'm demonstrating with blue. I'm going to sharpen my pencil. And a lot of people want to know how many layers I put on, and I've learned pretty much over time that the best answer to that, let me adjust my lighting a little bit, is until it's saturated. But with polychromos pencils by Faber-Castell, it tends to be you never really need more than 5 layers. So what I've done is just to demonstrate that there's a couple different ways to achieve the total saturation. If you look at this area here, I've only put 1 layer very roughly of the blue. I just kind of took the cobalt blue and just very lightly put it down. Now, to get an example of how I would use up to 5 layers is to make this a darker blue where this pocket is on her shirt. If I start with just 1 layer, and you saw that's just 1 layer. This is the second layer, and I make a very sharp pencil and I make it very light touch. It looks like I'm holding my pencil very tight, so it looks like I'm pressing hard, and I have a glass table so that kind of you hear the pencil, but really I'm going very slow. If I make these little oval marks and I do a very small circular motions, they're kind of long ovals, and that second layer is still very light, it covers it a little bit more, so it's a little bit different shade. And then, so I'm going to continue here with this area and make this is all still the second layer, and I'm making it very light. So let's say that I want to go, this is all still the second layer of pencil, very light touch. So let's say I want to make a third layer. Same thing, I'll rotate my pencil, get a sharp edge of it, and I'll go in the same circular motions on top of the second layer to make a third layer. I'm still making the same touch, very light touch, but that third layer looks like this. This is a little bit darker. So that's the 1, 2 layers, and 3 layers. So I'm going to go ahead and continue with the third layer here so that I can build up to a 4th. So then here, all this area here is 3 layers. This is 2 layers, this is 1. Now I'm going to make it in 4 layers, just part of this. So if I take another light touch and go on top of that, that's the 4th layer right there. So you can see that's the 4th layer. Now I'm going to go ahead and continue. This down here is only the 2nd layer on this part. So then I have to go back over it to give it that 3rd layer. It's like as you build it up, so we only have 1 more layer of light touch. I think maybe I got that wrong. Yeah, this is the 5th layer. You can tell this is the 5th layer because when I use a really sharp pencil and go over it, it's very saturated. It starts to look like this part up here. So as you move along, that's why it usually only takes 5 layers, because you've got your first layer, your second light layer, your third light layer, makes it a little darker, your 4th light layer. I'm not touching very hard at all, I'm not pressing hard, and then this is the 5th light layer. So it gets pretty saturated. If you go with a 6th light layer, it gets a little darker. You can continue to build up, but you usually don't need more than 5 layers. For extra dark places, I might put 6 or 7 layers, but as a general rule, 5 layers gets you to that solid saturation. So there's another way to do it. Now, if I get lazy and I really want to get to that area quicker, and I have a small area, I can press harder if I want, and I can just go right on top of it in a super sharp pencil and press really hard. Get the same saturation as I got with 5 layers. So nothing says you can't build up with lots of layers to get to that 5. Nothing says that you can't press really hard to skip the 2nd and 3rd layers and just get that 5th layer all together, especially when you're just using one color. The benefit of doing the 5 layers like this, the major benefit of building up with those is that if I'm going to make one solid color, it doesn't matter. If it's only going to be this color, I can press really hard and just get it there. But if I'm going to make multiple colors to blend to make another color, for instance, if I want it to be here and I want this shade here to be a little darker because maybe there's a shadow here, then I would use a darker color blue to come right on top of it now and start building it in. And I'll start building up that color to kind of change the shade of that area. Where if I'm working with just, if I did the full shade 5 here and then tried to go back on top, you can do it. but it's harder to get that darker blue to kind of show up. So when I'm working in light layers, I can work in other colors of blue, and build it up. I hope that makes sense. But when I'm working with just one color to try to get that saturation, it's usually no more needed than 5. So sometimes you'll see me kind of cheat because I'm like, I really don't want to spend a lot of time, and I will just use a sharp pencil and press a little bit harder to get my total saturation built up and not worry about building it up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if my hand is tired and I've been working a long time and drawing all day, or I'll spend the extra time, because it does take more time to go light layers. If I sit here and just build up these layers one by one with a sharp pencil and rotate it, it takes a lot longer to get that 5 layers. And so that can get kind of frustrating waiting to get there. I'm kind of an impatient person, even though it looks like I have all this patience drawing these pictures that take, 80 to 100 hours, but it takes me a lot longer sometimes to build up that saturation, so I will press a little bit harder. You got to make sure you have a good paper. This is Stonehenge paper by Legion paper. If you don't have a really good paper to build it up, then when you press hard, you can really damage your paper. But I know that my Stonehenge can handle it. It has no problem taking the harder pressure, and I know exactly how hard to press so that I don't ruin the paper. But this is such a heavy saturated piece of paper that by the time I'm done with all the shades and the background coloring, or this is not background, this is the shirt, but there's a lot of areas that are darker colored because of the fabric, and so I'll be weaving in some of this darker color into it as well to make it look more like fabric. But I know what my paper can handle. So if you're using a very thin paper, you're not using the Stonehenge that I recommend to use with polychromos color pencils, then you may have to be a little bit more careful about pressing hard. But so the answer to the question that I've been asked a lot is, how many layers of pencil do I use to build up to the most saturated area, especially to the very dark black of the background of this particular portrait of my daughter Evie. People think that I must put 20 layers of pencil, but in reality it's only up to 5. Typically you won't see me use more than 5 layers if I'm using a very light. But the reason I have a hard time answering that question is because sometimes I'm actually coloring and I'm pressing really hard and I'm only doing 1 layer because I'm trying to do like a shortcut to get to it a little quicker. And sometimes I am going slowly and building up those light layers. So really depends on how you want to do it. There's not really a right or a wrong. The point is to get the area built up as a saturation. It is wrong to put hard pressure if you are using a paper that can't handle it. So yeah, I will say in that case there is a right and wrong way. But as far as technique, if you feel like building it up with a very light pencil, just kind of like very light touch like this, you can definitely build it up. And when you're doing a large area that's all the same color and you're not adding the shadows yet, it kind of breaks up the monotony. Sometimes I will just color the area a little bit here, a little bit there, move around. As long as I'm doing my little circular motions, I can easily tie it all back together. And I know that it's going to be the same saturation when it's all done, so it doesn't matter where I pick on the area to color the blue in. But anyway, that's just a little bit of tip about the layering process, and people ask that quite a bit. How many layers of pencil do you use on that? And a lot of people think that the process is with building up color is tons and tons of layers, which could really take a lot more time. But for colors like this, it's not important. Skin tones, yes, it is definitely a lot of different colors of layers, light layers built up. But for a background, a very saturated area, or a fabric, it is definitely dependent on how you want to build that color up. The idea is just to get the saturation there. You can still go back on top, even if with really saturated areas or with 5 or 6 layers, you can still go back on top to add that variation in tone and to build up the shades. And what's good about that is it's hard to do that with wax pencils, but with polychromos pencils you can really build up the color without, and you don't have to. A lot of people will tell me, well, I can't, my paper won't take anymore, but it does take more. You just need a sharper pencil and a light touch. And so a lot of times when I'm teaching, people will say, well, my paper won't take any more color, it's oversaturated, I'm done. If you're using polychromos pencils, I've never really seen that happen. When people tell me they can't add any more color, I go and I look and I sit down at their piece. I say, do you mind if I try? And as soon as I pick up a piece of paper, a pencil and their paper and start kind of showing them, they're always surprised that, wow, that it did take that color. So it'll continue to take more layers if you need to go over 5 or 6. But usually whatever color I'm trying to make, I'm going to use a combination of colors to build up that 5 to 6 layers to ultimately have the color I need by the 5th or 6th layer. I don't usually have to go over it after I've built that up. So anyway, that's some little information and tip about layering. Hope it helps.